Buckle up for more of You're All Doomed, the podcast that is making things up as we craft our own Friday the 13th, Part 13. I'm Key Grip Greg.
And I'm Script Supervisor Brian.
And this episode begins in a very pleasant, dimly lit, comfortable-looking appointment room. It appears to be the office of a mental health care professional, almost a clinical psychologist or a counselor of some kind. We see a young child stand up, thank the psychologist and give her a hug, and leave. Obviously, this young person has been there for an appointment and has had a productive session. As the child walks out the door, the cell phone laying on the psychologist's desk begins to vibrate on silent. She's still a little bit discombobulated after organizing her notes and everything, so she's kind of, frantically grabbing for the phone and trying to lock her office door.
So you mentioned that there was a child leaving this appointment. Who do you think who is the actor playing the child?
I was casting from the multiverse with this movie. I was not concerned with keeping everyone of the same era. And so in my mind, I had young Danny Pintaro being the young patient, perhaps even recovering from his terrible experience with Cujo, or Tony Danza.
That's an inspired choice, especially since I'm distantly related to Danny Pintaro by marriage.
Does that make you the boss?
I'm always the boss. So I went in a slightly different direction for the child on the couch here, and I went with Maisie Williams from Game of Thrones.
That probably makes more sense.
She's going to need a lot of counseling. But as much as I would like to discuss our Game of Thrones, who's the boss crossover, I think we do need to get back to the point here. And so this woman has finally gotten
the red wedding of Tony and Angela.
So the woman finally gets her shit together and finally answers the phone, and she's we're seeing like her side of the conversation only. So at first she's very happy to hear from the person on the other end of the phone, and we kind of hear like a muffled voice coming out of the phone, and this person is trying to skip the pleasantries and get straight to the point. And suddenly we hear a pretty clear voice coming out of the phone saying, Ginny, you have to listen to me. Something is going on at Camp Crystal Lake. So in case you're wondering, the Ginny is actually Ginny Field from Friday the 13th, Part 2.
Yeah, it looks like Amy Steele is back. We're obviously very happy to see her. What do you think that she? What do you think that she looks like? What's she wearing? What vibe do you get from Ginny at this stage of her life?
I feel like she's kind of like a cool hipster mom. She was always kind of the cool chick in Part 2. She did have like a little bit of a kind of like a laid back vibe, and I suspect that she would probably still have a similar look and feel now, because especially if it's pretty clear that she's a child psychologist, which is something that she was talking about doing even back in Part 2. So she'd want to, kind of convey a friendly image to, whatever child that she's speaking to. But yeah, she basically just looks like a grown up Ginny Field.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I picture her being a pretty casual, welcoming kind of therapist. I believe that at this stage, Amy Steele is around 62. So, I mean, I think that she would definitely be showing her maturity, but would still be a knockout. I picture maybe, she kind of had that strawberry blonde hair in Part 2. I see it maybe being streaked with gray, or perhaps even all gray at this point. And I feel like she might wear like reading glasses on a chain around her neck or something, giving a fairly maternal presentation to her patients.
Mm-hmm.
When we were coming up with the ideas for this story, you were the one, I think, that initially pitched having Ginny return and I'm fully on board with that. But I was at first a little bit reluctant, just because Halloween did that with Jamie Lee Curtis in the 2018 relaunch. And then even the weekend in February that we got together to start working on this, we watched the Netflix Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and it brought back the character, not the actress, of Sally Hardesty from the original Texas Chainsaw. And so I was like, oh, well, here we're making our own story, and we're bringing back one of the heroines too. But then I was thinking about it more, and it makes perfect sense because Friday the 13th has never been a groundbreaking series. We've talked about this in the show before, but they always kind of follow trends, and it's definitely a trend to revisit earlier episodes of a series and bring back characters from previous installments. So it's almost expected that Friday the 13th would do such a thing.
Right. And Jaws 3 wouldn't have worked if Mike Brody hadn't come back.
Exactly. And as we know, it's a masterpiece.
No, we did go back and forth about it a little bit because there's obvious parallels, but I think with these movies, there's just kind of like this natural inclination to want to bring back original characters because that's where everything started. And so if you're going to try to bring something to a close or at least kind of like reestablish a story, bring something in that's familiar so people can jump in. I mean, look at Force Awakens. I mean, it's no secret
right.
that, what they did there. So yeah, we're completely pandering to the Friday the 13th fans, but I think it makes sense. So back to what Megan was saying to Ginny on the phone, she seemed pretty alarmed and also pretty convinced that something was going on at Camp Crystal Lake. And I'm just wondering, like, do you think that's too much of a jump in logic? Like, do you think that one construction guy showing up dead on the construction site is indicative of Jason Voorhees being back? Or do you think, or do you think she's overreacting?
I think it's within the realm of believability that she would immediately jump to the Voorhees conclusion. Given what she went through, losing her father and all of the local police to Jason at one point in the past, she would obviously have been traumatized by that. She probably even based her whole law enforcement career on that event. And is probably, I would see Megan as being very distrustful of this area, perhaps to the point of being paranoid, but that would still be okay if she's coming to the wrong conclusion. I still believe it's a conclusion she would come to. And I mean, I would think that would even be why she wanted to be the sheriff of Essex County, so that she could keep an eye on Crystal Lake. And she knows that, it's easy to dismiss things that might turn out to be Jason. So she probably would veer too far in the other direction.
Right. And assuming we remember to do this down the road, we will try to establish like what has happened at Crystal Lake in the past and how long has it been since something has happened.
As soon as we are reunited with Ginny, we cut to the title card. Now, I have some ideas for what the title of this movie could be.
Oh, I haven't considered this. Okay.
Part of me thought, like, do we want to hold on revealing what our title is until after we've finished the story, because we don't want to tip our hand on anything. But then I remembered, well, this series has never been coy with its marketing. It pretty much puts its titles and ideas up front. I mean, Jason Takes Manhattan reveals that he's going to Manhattan. The final chapter revealed at the time that it was the final chapter. So I said, the hell with it. Let's just go ahead and name this damn thing. And I have a couple of suggestions. I want to hear what you think of these. One option I came up with is Retribution, Friday the 13th, Part 13.
The first thing I think of there is like a Matrix sequel, because they had a lot of like, Revolutions and whatever the other R ones
Jason
were.
Reloaded. All right, then the next one I thought up was Lethal Weapons, Friday the 13th, Part 13. And I liked that because I wanted this one to be sitting on my shelf next to Lethal Weapon instead of...
So is it weapon plural?
Yeah.
Okay, so who are the weapons? Oh,
Well,
or just the weapons that Jason uses?
right, and I mean, as we might find some references to Lethal Weapon 3 later on in this season, so I got a kick out of that one. And then, of course, riffing on other series led me to The Final Blood, Friday the 13th, Part 13.
I kind of like that one. Is there like a parenthetical afterwards that says like, no, really?
Well, we're going to have a couple opportunities for that because I also thought perhaps Friday the 13th, Part 13, Jason's Final Rampage.
That sounds like a video game to me.
With a giant lizard and a gorilla.
Yeah, just Jason climbing a building and knocking it down.
And then instead of Jason's Final Rampage, I thought perhaps something simple like R.I.P. Friday the 13th, Part 13.
I do like that, but I have a tendency when I'm thinking of movie titles, like if I'm writing something myself and I'm thinking of a title, the first thing I do is to figure out how it could be used against me in a movie review.
Very smart.
And so
Very smart.
I'm already seeing headlines that are like RIP, RIP, Friday the 13th, Part 13, or like RIP to this franchise, or, like it's going to be used against us immediately. So I like the idea, but we're going to regret that down the road, I think.
And the last one I thought of is sort of one of the trendier ones, but like I said, this series is known for jumping on bandwagons. How about just Jason, Friday the 13th, Part 13?
I like that, especially if Jason is like a much bigger font and
right.
the Friday the 13th part of it is like very much a subhead in terms of like how it's treated on posters and stuff, because I think the word is so recognizable, or the name is so recognizable, that it would work. I mean, they did a Freddy versus Jason and people knew exactly what that was. So I think that might be my favorite.
Yeah, I felt like that one kind of bridged the gap with like Jason X or Jason Lives. And, you get kind of both branding recognitions on the same poster that way.
One thing I'm in total agreement on is that you can't have a Friday the 13th Part 13 and not acknowledge the Part 13. Like it's got to be in there.
Yeah, it would be a grave misstep not to, even if it's somewhat tongue in cheek, remind people like, hey, we finally made it to Part 13.
I think there might already be a movie named this, but do you think it would work if it was just called 13?
I don't. I think that would be too vague. I would see that being like the teaser poster treatment 6 months before release. You have like the recognizable font that just says 13 on a black field, and then maybe like, coming soon with a hockey mask at the very bottom or something.
Or like, yeah, I like that. So like the first poster maybe just says 13 and you're like, I wonder what that is. And then maybe a month later they release the second poster and it's the same thing, but it says Friday above it. Or
there you go.
And it just starts to build to what you think it's going to be.
Yeah. That'd be cool.
Yeah, you gotta have the 13 in there somewhere. But I agree. As soon as I said it, I realized it doesn't quite work on its own, because the movie's not about 13. It's not the number. It's Friday the 13th is what the deal is. So yeah. Are we gonna settle on a name to move forward with? I know we're not necessarily. Well, I guess we should, because then with future episodes we can refer to what we're talking about.
All right. Well, I mean, I'm good with that. So, I mean, I think that's both of our favorites. I mean, I do kind of like R.I.P., but I understand your concerns. So, yeah, I mean, I'm happy with Jason, Friday the 13th, Part 13.
Or if it's like an amalgamation of like R.I.P., the final Jason, Friday the 13th, Part 13.
For the last time.
Lethal Weapon. Okay, so now that we've gotten the title out of the way, what are we going to do for music? Who do you think the composer should be for Jason, Friday the 13th, Part 13?
I mean, I would like Harry Manfredini to be involved on some level, whether it's and not strictly just inspired by, or Jason vocal effect by. I mean, I'd like him to have a hand in it, but I could also see the need to perhaps pair him with someone, or like maybe he contributes certain segments of a score, sort of like I think John Williams did for Solo, where he crafted a couple of themes and then someone else orchestrated the remainder of the score. I could see that working. What do you think?
I was kind of leaning toward. I agree. First of all, that Manfredini should be involved, because whether it's like inspired by or contributions by or something, like, let's give this guy the credit that he's due. But I love the Cloverfield theme, the theme that plays at the end of the first Cloverfield movie by Michael Giacchino, I think you pronounce it. It's just this great like monster theme. It starts off really quiet, and there's kind of like creepy like vocal track, and then it's like strings just kind of build and build, and it gets louder and louder, and then it gets to this thing, and it just like classic monster movie. It's perfect for something like Cloverfield. But I also think that it would work really well. Like that type of motif would work really well for a Friday the 13th movie, where you just have this music that kind of like builds to something more intense, because if we do our jobs correctly, this movie that we've crafted is going to get more intense as we go along. And so I kind of feel like the score would do the same thing, where it's like kind of like a nice score at the beginning, and then it starts to build and build and build. And then by the end, you've got this pretty creepy theme, just like general theme that's going to be carried through the movie. So I think he would work.
Yeah, that's cool. And certainly brings kind of a level of lush sound that this series has not always managed to get from the score. I feel like even Manfredini, as the series went on, was maybe given fewer and fewer resources to work with. So, what started out sounding completed and fully fleshed out as a score sounded a lot more keyboardy and synthy as some of the later episodes happened, and that's not his fault. I mean, it was just whatever budget they could afford to pay the guy. So yeah, it'd be fun to hear like a really well produced, full blown orchestral score.
I will say that one thing that kind of bugs me about horror scores in general is when the music is used as like something to scare you. So like there'll be like an abrupt noise in the music, and that's supposed to scare you. I'm like, well, you're not scaring me, you're just startling me. That's just a loud noise,
right? And it wouldn't scare the characters. Like, that doesn't make sense. Yeah,
right. Yeah, so I prefer to like let the scares happen visually on the screen, and then the music is just kind of an accent to that. And I do feel like there is sort of a trend with horror scores where it's like that tends to be like what they think is the scariest thing, because they just have this huge loud sound that comes out of nowhere, and you're like, well, of course that's going to scare me.
Right.
After the credits and the beautifully lush score, we find ourselves in a coffee shop. It's probably the next day, I'm guessing, and Megan and Ginny are sitting across from each other at a table. This is where Megan is kind of telling Ginny what we all know, which is the camp is being knocked down. There's kind of support from the community, but it's mostly indifference. But Megan is convinced that it's probably not a great idea. And then also that this construction worker was killed, and the main construction guy, Delaplane, is just assuming that it was an accident because he just probably fell off his bulldozer and hit his head. But Megan knows it's probably something more. So she starts to tell Ginny all of this stuff.
And Ginny is receptive. In fact, she having a little bit more of a handle on Jason's psyche than most people might, says, oh, when they knock down that cabin, that's probably what would really set him off. He wouldn't necessarily be too worried about people building anything there, but if you start knocking down the camp, he's going to get pissed. And so she's taking this pretty seriously, and is glad that Megan alerted her to what's going on.
So since we're the podcast that digs into all of the important details, what do you think that Megan and Ginny ordered at the coffee shop?
I definitely think Megan would be drinking tea, because the actress that portrayed her in Part 6, Jennifer Cook, and her husband started a tea company. So I feel like that, is a nice little nod to...
And you have the cookbook.
Exactly.
Like, was it Celestial Seasonings or something like that?
Yes, exactly.
How did I completely... Man, I was just like a softball I just threw up to you. Did she order food, though?
I feel like she might be too nervous to eat, too worked up to eat. And I could see Ginny, I don't know how successful clinical psychologists are, but I could see her, especially if she's trying to fortify herself for what's coming, maybe, get something a little more substantial, and especially when someone else is picking up the tab. I could see her being opportunistic in that way. So, she would definitely get a plate of scrambled eggs and some bacon or something.
See, I see Ginny as a vegetarian.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, true.
But she definitely would be hungry because she's just driven or flown here to Crystal Lake from wherever she lives. So she's going to be hungry, but yeah, maybe like a vegetarian dish of some sort.
I could see this being some wry social commentary where, the waitress comes and asks Ginny what she wants, and Ginny says, "What are your vegetarian options?" And then the woman just brings her like an orange juice, because it's this little small town in, rural New Jersey that's like, fuck y'all and your vegetarianism.
A Voorhees burger and Jason fingers.
Exactly.
When you said rye commentary, I thought you were going to say she ordered rye bread.
My ham on rye commentary. The most important question I have for you about this coffee shop is, do they have a busboy?
Oh my God. They must. And not only a busboy, but is it the busboy?
I mean, I definitely think we could have a curly-haired, hulking goon of a busboy kind of lurking around in the background of shots, staring at the camera.
Because I feel like the busboy from Part 1 is probably a similar age to Ginny by the time that we saw Ginny in Part 2. Mm-hmm. So he's absolutely old enough to still be around and potentially still bussing like a demon.
Oh, demon.
Oh, sorry, demon. I didn't mean to bring up demon.
No, I agreed with you at first, but then as I realized, Part 2 takes place 5 years after Part 1. So the busboy, who was already kind of an adult in Part 1, would be at least a little bit older than Ginny. So he would probably be in his late 60s or something.
But you're underestimating his ability to continue to bus. He's still a bussing fiend.
Or he's not only the busboy, but he also owns the coffee shop. His hard work has paid off.
Oh, I like that. Yes. So he has progressed in life.
Yes.
I like that story.
He achieved his dream of owning the place that he used to clean up for.
Okay. So I like it. So the silent busboy is also the majority owner of this coffee shop in town.
Of the Crystal Lake Cafe. The ladies are there to meet with the foreman of the local overseer of the project. And he finally arrives, and it's John Burrow, who we saw standing behind Delaplane at the groundbreaking ceremony. And oddly enough, when he comes and sits down at the table, he gives Megan a little kiss on the cheek. Turns out they're married. I see this being kind of like an awkward social moment where, John thinks he's there to meet, his wife and her friend, and he's like, "Hi, you're Ginny. Nice to meet you." And the first thing Ginny says is, "You need to pause this project." And so he's immediately caught off guard and on the defensive.
Yeah, he gets blindsided by it. And that's when we hear John kind of start to lay out his motivations and his intentions. He's got a lot of money invested in this project, and they're too far along to pull the plug right now. So he's more than willing to listen to Megan, obviously his wife, but you can kind of tell, like, in the back of his mind, he's like, "I think you're blowing this out of proportion. It's not really that big of a deal." But also it's like, I've also got a lot of money in this. So even if it was a big deal, I can't really do much about it. So he's kind of a very kind of like neutral character right from the beginning. We don't really know like what his true intentions are.
Mm-hmm. even though Megan is insisting that Ginny knows what she's talking about and that he should listen, he's now even starting to kind of question why Megan is so up in arms about this. Sure, there was a guy found, killed at the construction site, but it was clearly an accident. And, she's jumping to conclusions that there's this problem that Ginny thinks is, being caused by Jason Voorhees and all this stuff. And, Megan's defense is, John, you know what I went through. The fact that I'm a police officer is because my father and all of his officers were killed by Jason all those years ago. And, the whole reason I wanted to become sheriff of Essex County is to keep an eye on this area. And, I have to believe it's Jason Voorhees. So, there's definitely some friction there.
Would this be a cool point? Because John's not going to know who Ginny is, right? Theoretically.
Presumably.
So maybe this is a good point where John's like, yeah, Megan, but like, that was just like a crazy isolated incident. Like,
oh, perfect.
Because like, they're always like, every time something happens, they're brushing it under the rug. And so he's like, yeah, it was an isolated incident. And Ginny's like, no, it's not. And Ginny doesn't go into the whole story, but like, we know what her story is. And she explains that, years earlier, she had encountered Jason at Packanack Lodge, and he had killed a bunch of people. And you kind of see like the wheels starting to click a little bit in John's head, where it's like, he's not fully convinced, but he's more convinced than he was a minute ago. Cause he's like, okay, wait a minute. There's now two people that have had two completely separate incidences with this Jason dude, or at least, in the area of Camp Crystal Lake. So maybe there's something to look into here.
Right. Or even at the very least, he can't deny what they're presenting him with, but it also might even make him kind of double down in his own position that this is not that. This is just, an accident again. Like if it was Jason, it would be so much worse or something like that. But yeah, this does convince him to agree to look into it and, maybe heighten alert at the site, maybe add some additional security, et cetera. It's hard to know whether he's just placating them or if he's, really getting on board. His motivations remain mysterious.
I think he's mostly placating them, because he even mentions what we're all kind of thinking too, is that Jason would be pretty ancient around now. And so how much of a threat could he really be if it is really him lurking the campgrounds?
While this coffee shop meeting is going on, it turns out that the reporter who was causing some trouble at the press conference is now snooping around the construction site. Having heard about this quote unquote terrible accident that's happened, this dovetails with her research on all of the safety violations at the previous Delaplane projects and stuff. So she's snooping around, seeing if she can document some corner cutting and maybe even find out more information or get a gory picture of the construction worker that got killed. But she's busted.
I like how her main disguise is that she's just wearing a hard hat, and that's how she's going to blend
in. She figures they're very dumb construction people or something. Yeah, so she gets rousted by a couple of guys that are keeping an eye on things, and they basically kick her out and report back to base on their walkie-talkies or whatever that we just found someone snooping around. It was that mouthy reporter from the press conference, and
I think the plucky reporter snooping around and getting caught just kind of creates a convenient excuse for Delaplane and his crew, because it's like, okay, look, maybe our construction site wasn't as secure as it should have been, because even this reporter was able to sneak in really easily. Yeah. But we're gonna tighten things up, but we're still gonna maintain that the guy just died. It was an accident. There's nothing to be really concerned about here. There's no major threat. The only threat are these people that are snooping around that shouldn't be snooping around.
Yeah. Another reason for them to dismiss anything more serious going on. So having been kicked out of the site, the plucky reporter is driving away. She's on the phone with her her superior, whether it's an editor or a producer or a website, just whoever oversees her assignments. And as she's talking and half paying attention, she's on a pretty wooded, isolated road leaving the construction area, and out of the corner of her eye, she thinks she sees someone in the woods standing close to the road, kind of hidden by trees, watching her. And it's a quick glimpse. It kind of evokes that scene in part 2 where we see Jason dash across the road in front of the police car, and she's only half paying attention, but it snaps her out of her conversation, and she stops the car and gets out and says, "Hello, is anyone there?" She didn't know if it was somebody who needed help or whatever, but it caught her off guard. And so we get a little moment where she's kind of steps a few feet into the woods and looks around, and it feels very isolated. And you hear a few forest sounds, but it's lonely and a little bit, even though it's broad daylight, it's a little bit spooky. So she kind of shrugs and doesn't see anyone and heads back to her car and says to the person that she's on the phone with that she's going to maybe plan to come back to the construction site later and see what she can dig up. Ends the call, and as she's about to get back into the car, she hears a stick snapping behind her, and just as she turns around, her face is smashed by a sledgehammer. And I kind of envision this kill to be a quick cut, oof impact, more sound design. Like you don't actually see the impact, but it's, one of those things where what happened and you're just like, oh, and your brain fills in what you think you might see, but it's never depicted on camera.
Yeah, those are my favorite types of kills. It reminds me of the tree trunk kill in part 7, where I think the initial version of it had multiple hits against the tree, and it's just not nearly as effective as the one. And it's like, that's what you want, is just like that one big hit. You're like, oh, and then it's over. And you're like, you know exactly what happened. So I had the plucky reporter being played by Bryce Dallas Howard.
Interesting.
Kind of like a innocent go-getter, type attitude where she was, trying to get a leg up on the competition. And that's why she was sneaking around and just trying to get the story that her competitors wouldn't be able to get.
I pictured this person being a little bit younger and greener, but I'm always happy to see Bryce Dallas Howard doing something, whether it's behind the camera or in front of it. So I'll back you on that one. That's our only kill this episode. So we have one death, the plucky reporter.
So as we continue to develop this story from episode to episode, we encourage our listeners to reach out to us on social media, and please point out any gaps or mistakes that we're making, because a lot of this stuff is going to be hard to keep track of, but I think that's part of the fun. So if you identify a mistake or a flaw in our story that isn't going to work, point it out. And
yeah, it's only fair. We've been doing that to 12 other movies. So, you call us on our shit.
So to find out why I've only had one cup of coffee in my entire life, you're just going to have to tune in next week to another episode of You
I
Are
Can't
All
Wait.
Doomed.